Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank the Ban Ki-moon Center for International Cooperation, the Ban Ki-moon Foundation, and the Institute for Global Engagement and Empowerment at Yonsei University for inviting me to this important event. Your visionary initiatives with young people and tireless efforts in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals are an inspiration to us all. Your meeting's theme, Turning Point, From Crisis into Opportunity, perfectly articulates the current moment. People across the world are suffering the cascading effects of multiple crises. The COVID-19 pandemic, war and conflicts, climate-related disasters, and multiple economic and social hardships. A record 100 million people are now displaced worldwide. An additional 75 million to 95 million people are now experiencing extreme poverty. And under current climate commitments, we will see global temperatures increase by 2.8 degrees by 2050, a devastating scenario that will be a death sentence for many and will leave several parts of our planet uninhabitable. And in the face of all of this, global solidarity has floundered. Developing countries have been left with a raw deal on COVID vaccines and COVID recovery, on climate justice, on debt sustainability, and on SDG investment. The temptation may be to crumble under the weight of these compounding crises, or turn against each other, harden geopolitical divides, and sow hate and distrust. But that is not what we do at the United Nations. That is not the spirit that we see day in, day out from ordinary people facing difficult situations around the world. In fact, crises can create opportunities. They can inspire the bold actions that in past years may have seemed too risky, too disruptive. And we can see already who will be leading the charge towards these disruptive, bold, creative solutions. Young people. They are climate activists, human rights advocates, inventors, and innovators. In places like Iran or Afghanistan, young women are literally putting their lives on the line to fight for the future they deserve. Students are taking jobs and starting businesses to advance the common good. Graduates are developing new climate-smart technologies and nature-based solutions. More often than not, young people look at the world with compassion and respect for difference. Leaving no one behind is part of their DNA. And that's why the United Nations is working to respond to young people's needs and support them as they guide us towards a better future. During the tenure of His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, the UN appointed its first ever UN Youth Envoy. And just a few months ago, the General Assembly decided that the time had come to take that work to the next level. In creating a dedicated UN Youth Office, member states decided to place genuine and deep engagement with young people at the core of everything that we do. And in April, the Economic and Social Council Youth Forum will take place, bringing young people and their collective ideas, solutions, and innovations to the United Nations. Supporting young people also means offering them tools to address their own challenges. Young people face higher levels of unemployment, a higher proportion of employment in the informal sector, difficulties in accessing secondary education, and high levels of homelessness and climate and war-related displacement. If we want 2023 to be a breakthrough year, we need to recognize the unmet needs of young people and make the necessary investments to address them. The United Nations will continue standing with and for young people in this great effort. Ladies and gentlemen, even when the world around us appears to be unraveling, there is always hope and opportunity. But success is not automatic. We have to make it happen. 2023 provides the world with many opportunities to break the cycle of crises and travel a new path that will bring the world closer to the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals. Chief among these opportunities is the SDG Summit in September. At the halfway point to the 2030 Agenda, the summit provides the world with a platform to agree on a new direction. Governments and other partners must set out new ambitions for people, planet, and peace. Those with decision-making power must begin to unlock an SDG stimulus that is key to driving major just, green and digital transitions in developing countries. And all partners, in particular young people, can work together to send a clear message to the world. We have reached a turning point. In the face of division and challenge, we choose hope, unity, and solidarity. And we will unite to ensure that current and future generations alike enjoy a life of dignity and prosperity on a safe and on a healthy planet for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General, for your speech. Let me now introduce our next distinguished speaker, Her Excellency Garsha Mashal, the Deputy Chair of the Elders and the former First Lady of South Africa. Please welcome her with a big round of applause.
Good morning. The President of Yonsei University, my friend and colleague, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. A big thank you to my dear friend and one of Korea's finest son, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, for the invitation to address this prestigious gathering this morning. I come to you from a beautiful country nestled in the southeast of Africa called Mozambique, and my second home, South Africa, which is much well known to you through someone who is very close to me, Nelson Mandela. There may be 7 time zones and a few oceans that separate us, but the challenges we experience in my corner of the world are strikingly similar to those found here. You see, never before has the human family felt our interconnectedness as acute and as strongly as over the past few years. Matters of life and death meet us at each of our doorsteps. A deadly virus halted us all our tracks. COVID left us grieving the same tears over the death of loved ones, the loss of jobs and income, and the recognition of our failures as a human race to build education, health, and economic systems that could withstand shocks to the architecture. We all experience an interdependence of impact, negative or positive, which we can no longer ignore. From Seoul to Maputo and to Pretoria, children the world over are suffering from learning loss. As we sit here today, 222 million young people have been forced out of school by conflict and crisis over these past few years. Those who are charged with powering the economies of tomorrow are leading us into innovations of discovery, are being locked out of critical learning opportunities. The very promise of a vibrant future as a human family is at grave risk. We saw the gains of past decades on human development wiped out in months by the COVID and its associated impacts. And now, by a war with the epicenter in Europe, but those collected damage ripples out to every continent on Earth. We are spiraling further and further into what scholars are calling a polycrisis, a tangled knot of crises spanning global systems that significantly degrade our quality of life and threaten existence as we know it. In my home country, and second home country, of course, as we were barely keeping our heads above COVID-19 waters, the war in Ukraine triggered a tidal wave of skyrocketing inflation that has engulfed us all and left us swimming in cost of living, food production, energy crisis, and in a sea of social unrest. Let me not forget to include the climate crisis in this perfect storm, which is leaving millions defenseless against disruptive extreme weather events, exacerbating disruptions to global food production, and wreaking havoc on lives and livelihoods globally. In my home country, Mozambique and South Africa, over the past 5 years, we have experienced an unprecedented and devastating cyclones, I'm speaking of Mozambique now, and floods, which have killed hundreds of people and displaced millions of families and caused irreparable damage and losses in excess of $3 billion. As the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated existing inequalities and hit under-resourced communities hardest, make no mistake that the impacts of the polycrisis we are grappling with today are most acutely felt by those most vulnerable and marginalized. It is the lowest income countries, it is women and children, it is those on the fringes of every society without social protection and rights who are suffering most. At an alarming rate, resources are being diverted away from solely needed investments in health, education, water and sanitation, and other critical to our well-being and survival. Instead, billions of dollars are being mobilized for increased military expenditures, expanded battlefield capabilities, and expensive trade wars. This constellation of disasters have left us with frightening decline in human development. A fundamental shift to re-engineer society is needed. This is why I'm glad that we have convened here today in the spirit of identifying pathways of opportunity and designing solutions for our global family. I humbly offer a few suggestions for us to consider today. As in this room alone sit government, and we listened to government decision makers, captains of industry, brilliant academic and researchers, and decision makers with the power to mobilize the influence and resources necessary to untangle ourselves from this complex policy crisis barbed wire that has a stranglehold on us all. My suggestions are going to be a little bit out of the business as usual. I believe we cannot confront and resolve the crisis we face with the old rules of game. Opportunities have to be found deep in our capacity as human beings with intelligence, with creativity, with innovation, with the invention really to rethink how and why we got to where we are and how we are going to lead a different future for ourselves and a different future for our children and grandchildren. The word I want us to think of today is transformation. Transformation. One, I want to suggest the transformative power of science. Korea is, in natural resources, could be considered a poor country. But because it has decided to focus in human development and investing in education for every single child, every single citizen, Korea today gives a shining example of a society where children who get access to education, they start and they complete degrees, girls and boys with equal kind of results. I believe South Korea transformed itself through two investments: education to every citizen, and also it has made itself from a poor country, it transformed to a powerful and a dominant presence on the global stage. Today, we know of South Korea everywhere through Samsung, LG, Kia, and you name it. About decades ago, South Korea was not dominant in the global economies and even in technology particularly. So I want to talk of the transformative power of technology when it's used to the well-being of everyone, and it is based in innovation, in creativity, and it's based in human development. It is not about natural resources. It's not about oil and gas. It's not about forests. It is simply found in the capacity of enhancing intelligence, innovation, research, and make it transform their own society. And I think we have a very good example for the challenges we face today. When we talk of more than 220 million children who are out of school, perhaps we have to learn it is possible to have all children. When in school, when we are talking of learning crisis, even in developed world, where children complete primary and secondary schools and they can't read and write, they can't solve very simple programs, we can learn that investing in human capacity not only creates opportunities to all children, it creates success and it creates development. South Korea today is one of the developed countries in only single, perhaps 3 decades. We are grappling with how we are going to meet the sustainable development goals. We are asking ourselves, we have now, and Secretary General was suggesting that we have to think of a successor, but with the same rules of the game. I doubt if we don't have a deep introspection of how we invest in human development and the human dignity. The third transformation I want us to think of is the transformative power of equality. Equality amongst people, men and women, black and white, young and old, poor and rich, to identify what makes them equal and how together, hand in hand, with the same investment and recognition of the human dignity of each one and the capacity to participate in society, how you can build the societies of social justice. Countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland, they were able to identify the fundamental option of building equality amongst their citizens. It was not saying whether they are men or women. It was like all of them, inclusiveness. And of course, they had to invest in equality of women. And there they are, with societies of tolerance, with societies of social justice, with societies which does not know what poverty is all about. Some of them, they were very poor, like South Korea, which I mentioned before, 3 or 4 decades back. But now they are amongst the most prosperous nations and most tolerant societies, and as I said, of social justice. There are lessons in our world which show that it is possible. It is possible. We need to learn from them. We need to make them a reference to each one of our countries. Yes, to leave no one behind. Yes, to lead us to where we can say, as human family, with dignity, we all belong. The fourth power I wanted to mention is the transformative power of reason over the use of force. Yes, we talk of conflicts in Europe today, but we do have many other spots of conflict, at least in my part of the world, in Africa, in Asia, and perhaps less in Latin America today. But we are more and more, after the Second World War, when we agreed no more wars, and we all are going to say it should never happen again. It is happening in a very frightening pace, that conflict is becoming dominant in our societies. Reason over imposition of force. We need to recognize that, yes, as societies, we might have differences and conflict, but the conflict should never be the first result, the result and resort to resolve conflicts. We can give and take. We can listen to grievances and differences amongst us. We can take the aspirations of one another into account and have a common ground in which, yes, with difference, but we can live together. We can tolerate one another. We can more than tolerate, we can respect one another. And we are in a world where reason has to prevail. We are in a world where we have to learn to listen. And to listen is to take account everyone's aspirations and to take it as part of human nature, that will be different, will be diverse, but we have a common destiny. And take into account the interests of each one. So, in my part of the world, we also learned in our history to listen to one another. That's why what looked to be an intractable situation in South Africa, in Southern Africa, in fact, racial discrimination, the imposition of regimes which did not respect anyone. We found a way, and we established peace, and we have nations in which everyone belongs. Yes, we still have challenges, but we learn that the solution is working together and finding a common ground. I want to submit that whatever are the differences which are confronting the world today, reason is power. Imposition of force is not a solution. In a conflict, at the end, no one wins. No one wins. We all lose. We lose in human life. We lose even in our culture, heritage, situations which were built centuries and centuries are completely destroyed in months. No one wins. So I believe we need to recognize some of these powers I'm mentioning and to use them in recreating the way we relate to one another, the way we take each one of our citizens as an asset which should not be marginalized. In ways we say, there is no small and big country. There's no small and big nations. We all have the same rights under the sun in this planet, which is belong to us, and we don't have, as Secretary General was saying, we don't have a planet B. We came to the crisis of climate change. We have to recognize that it is a result of recklessness from our side as human. When we attacked the planet and we tried to use the planet in a selfish way to meet immediate, what we called development targets or development goals at the time, and now nature is responding violently against us. We came to this situation, but we can reverse this situation. And again, I go back to my first submission. With science, with technology, with recognizing the equality amongst us, we can also tackle the climate crisis. Respecting that development is not destruction. It doesn't mean destruction of nature, of destruction of the planet. We need to live with peace and respect with the planet. We can do it, and we have to find the best ways to get there. And finally, I come to a point which is very dear to my heart and my life. It's the power of women. The power of women. For very strange reasons, our societies have come to a point where we decided that women are inferior to men. Very strange reasons. I don't think there is reason which can explain this. But even in countries where education is available to every citizen, women who are qualified, they are experts, they have a lot of experience working because they have talent and they have expertise to offer. But globally, women earn less than men doing the same job. According to some research, there's no one single country which can claim that has achieved the principle of equal work, equal pay. It sounds so simple as that. It's not a favor. It's not a question of training. It's not a question even of productivity. It is simply because they are women and they are going to earn less than men. I think we have a deep introspection to say, why is it? How can we explain it to ourselves? We are in a world where gender-based violence is reaching proportions of a pandemic as well. Yes, there is gender-based violence by women against men, but the most dominant feature of it is men against women, simply because they are women. To a point where women feel threatened in their own homes, within the family which is expected to protect them, within the family which is expected to give them the space for expression fully, because families are built on the basis of love. It is a choice to be with someone you choose. But at the end, perhaps in some cases, as women are gaining much more prominence, men feel threatened. No, equality should never be felt as a threat to the other. Equality, it's humanizing. It makes us much more human, much more kind to one another, much more respectful of the dignity of each one. Equality recognizes that we are born equal and we die equal. Nature did not make a mistake when it allowed us to be born exactly the same way, whether you are female or male, whether you are in north or south, whether you're in west or east, wherever you are as human, you are born the same way and you die the same way. That's the lesson of how equal we are. And I submit then that we should dismantle the beliefs which have inculcated in us to fear equality, to fear that if I'm equal to someone else, power is going to be taken from me. No, we'll be all much more powerful when we are equal. And we can take it to the big home of all of us, the United Nations, which Secretary General fought so hard, for instance, within the Security Council. Some of the biggest challenges we face is because within the Security Council, there are those who believe they are more powerful than others, and they refuse fearlessly to release power for equality to any single nation, to any single country. As I was saying, there's no big countries or big nations. All nations and countries are equal. But in our common home, in the United Nations, there are those who believe they are bigger than others. And they fear, in fact, they fear the power of the equality I mentioned, the power of what can come from just knowledge, wisdom, expertise from small countries. Then they feel threatened. I want to submit then that these are the kind of things in which we are not going to rebuild our societies after all these crises. We are not going to build a future in which every one of us has a stake and has a sense of belonging if we don't question these which are not architectural challenges, are mostly in the minds of people. And we as people, we have to challenge ourselves to build the bridges. Again, I will say, women are bridge builders. They have that soft power of using and aligning the mind and the heart in every single thing they do. They align always the mind and the heart. Perhaps because nature has given women to be protective of life, particularly in the early ages of our existence as human. We depend so much on women, and we had to be given naturally that sense of nurturing and giving so much value to life and to social relations of accommodating one another, even in the intractable conditions of harsh conflict. We need to bring women at the center to help us to solve our conflicts. This is the lesson we'll talk about perhaps in the panel much later today, but it is to say we are to lose when we continue to marginalize women in decision-making, in conflict resolution, in social life. To finalize, I want to say some of the examples of how women can be a best solution in situations of crisis came from how women leaders during COVID, they came better in the management of COVID crisis. We remember Germany. We remember New Zealand. Do we remember also that some of those who came up with vaccine, AstraZeneca, in Oxford, it is Sarah Gilbert and her team, majority of women who came to provide vaccine to a global challenge. Yes, the one who came up with the formula of Moderna in the US, I forgot her name now, is a woman. Yes, we know that in situations of extreme complexity of negotiating, Secretary General came really with the brilliant idea of SDGs. But he was wise enough to surround himself with more women in the UN, more than any other Secretary General before him. He was wise enough to give power to Amina Mohammed to be the chief negotiator of the Sustainable Development Goals. Negotiating, bringing everyone to the table, recognize the power of all of us. Women can be a solution, and the young, and they have to be a solution for the crisis we are confronted with. So I'm submitting to end my introductory remarks this morning. We started saying that women should be at the center stage. And now I'm saying it's more than just at the center stage. Women have to be in equal stage for any of the crises we call today polycrisis. Let's invent, transform our institutions. Let's allow, in fact, they are half of humankind. How do we want to develop with? Look at me. I'm a body which is complete. How could I dare that I will function with the half of myself and ignore the other half of myself? Impossible. And part of it is because we need to bring women in leadership in every single institution, public and private, at the local and the global, local and national, and from national to global, to bring that powerful and sophisticated power which women are to confront and to resolve the challenges of today. I had thought of talking of young people, but Amina did so brilliantly that I just can say, yes, I sign up to everything she has said about young people. So let's be creative. Let's be innovative. Let's take the examples of those countries who are faring better in many aspects. Yes, equality is possible. Yes, respect for one another is possible. And even the learning crisis is possible. And Korea in science and technology is giving us the example. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Graça Machel, for your inspiring words. Ladies and gentlemen, we have one more keynote for you, and this is by the president, the former president of the Republic of Colombia, Iván Duque Márquez. Please, let's see his keynote.
Let me express my thank you to President Sung, President of Yonsei University, and also my deepest gratitude to my good friend, former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. It is a great honor for me to participate in this amazing panel, in this amazing event, where we are reflecting about the future of the Sustainable Development Goals. As I have said multiple times, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals can be grouped into three great subjects: climate action, or sustainability. The second one is social equality. And the third one, sustainable and inclusive growth. Those 17 goals that today are the reference model of development planning can be grouped into those three subjects. But today, I just want to concentrate myself in talking about the present and the future of climate action around the world. And basically, also contribute to the discussion by saying that the challenges we face are not small. Why? Because the first great obstacle that we face in terms of climate action, it's about the resources that are available fiscally in multiple countries to attend their needs. Primarily because, as the IMF has pointed out, the world faces an average debt to GDP ratio of around 99%. That means that on a continuous basis, inside government cabinets around the world, there is a constant debate of about what penny goes to education, what goes to health, what goes to housing, and what goes to climate action. And if we don't allow the climate investments to take place in an accelerated way, we might not get to the idea that we have all focused in, which is that by year 2030, we must have a reduction of 45% in all the global emissions. So the question is, what can be done? And on those fronts, I just want also to reference that two things are needed, especially for those poorer countries around the world. We need to accelerate and create mechanisms of debt to climate action swaps, which means that efforts that are done by impoverished countries in terms of climate action can also be linked to the pardon of debts. That means to swap the climate action for the debt that those countries have concentrated. That requires a lot of technical overview and traceability, but it's a must. And the other thing that is needed is that, especially for middle-income countries that need to accelerate most of their climate action policies, there needs to be an agreement with the IMF so that the necessary fiscal investments that are required in the next 7 years towards the 2030 agenda can have a great amount of those investments to not be counted under the fiscal deficit lines. That means that those investments will be below the fiscal deficit calculations. Obviously, that implies that there cannot be a moral hazard and that there's no free lunch in terms of what the countries are committed to do. There needs to be traceability. There needs to be a very clear following up daily on those policies. But it is a must that the IFIs think and address these very clear two needs. The other element that I want to highlight is that if we really want to have a carbon neutral and nature positive planet, we need to accelerate the 30 by 30 initiative, which means that by the year 2030, most of the countries in the world shall have at least, at minimum, 30% of their territory declared a protected area. That can be possible if there is a political willingness, as it happened in Colombia. During my administration, we started with the 14% protected areas that we had in our nation, and we left it at 34% before 2030, and in fact in 2022. So if countries follow the example of Colombia, we will be able to secure the largest amount of protected areas ever in our history. And that obviously includes also maritime territories, where we have to acknowledge that practices as trawling can basically destroy the coral reefs, which are the home of 45% of all the life in our oceans. People are not aware that the destruction of the coral reefs every year releases almost the same amount of carbon dioxide as the aviation sector. So if we protect maritime areas and non-land territories, we will be effectively contributing to the climate action that is needed in terms of nature positiveness. But this also implies that we need to mobilize resources. And that's another element that I want to present before you. we need to accelerate the carbon credit markets around the world. We can't see the carbon credit markets as an activity that does not have a sound construction in terms of their value and in terms of their capacity to mobilize resources, specifically to communities that participate on conservation and also on the offsets of carbon emissions. Definitely, we need to strengthen the auditing capacity, the validation capacity, the evaluation capacity. But the carbon credit markets need to be reaffirmed as a mechanism in which we can mobilize resources for climate action and at the same time monetize resources for those communities that engage in these type of practices. We propose that in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, a more modern, more straightforward, more reliable, more trustworthy carbon credit needs to be developed. And there are great opportunities happening right now. For example, the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, where multilateral actors, where IFIs, where important foundations and also governments are highly committed on creating projects that benefit the whole society. I also want to highlight the importance of the acceleration of the energy transition. We need to move forward and rapidly for non-conventional renewable energies, but that does not happen overnight. And we need to have a transition that is sound, responsible, and that guarantees the energy security for the countries in the world. That also implies that incentives need to be brought to the fiscal and especially the tax policies, and that we can also allow communities to participate in projects such as smart grids and also unifamiliar solar panels that can address primarily in unconnected areas around the world as a mechanism to close the gap of not having the access to electricity. We also need to make a big push on clean mobility and expand like no other time the car park of individuals, but also public transportation and cargo. Colombia, for example, in just 5 years, became #1 country in Latin America with a public fleet of vehicles that are run by EVs. And the same with cargo fleet. And today, actually, the individual density of electric vehicles, it's something that demonstrates that good incentives can accelerate this process. We need to think about low carbon agriculture. We need to think about silvopastures. We need to create an umbrella in those communities in need to say no to not clean ways of cooking, but allow them to have affordable energy. And we need to protect high altitude ecosystems. We need to protect the Amazon. We need to protect national parks in Africa. And we need to protect jungles in Asia. If we see the 4 most important spots in the world to preserve biodiversity, we need to accelerate the investments and the mobilization of resources. Otherwise, we will not be able to complete the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to think smartly on green finance. We need to think smartly on having green taxonomies where countries can have the glossary of all their activities and that the investment in ESG is done in a very transparent way. If we do this, we certainly will be able to address also the impact that climate change has on multiple countries, primarily because of the effects of natural disasters. Good climate intelligence to predict elements of nature derived from climate change that can harm societies need to be addressed, and that requires the application of AI technologies. We must see cities as the place where the highest concentration of efforts must take place now. And this involves waste management. Also work on waste to energy solutions. Think of cities like biodiverse cities where all the activities are aimed to protect biodiversity. That the stress that cities create on water are addressed. That we also tackle elements as coastal erosion. and that we guarantee that there is a conscience of citizens to also reduce their individual carbon footprint. All these elements are necessary to address the roadmap of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Without a secure, decisive, well-funded climate action, we won't be able to close the social gaps, and we will not guarantee that there is a sustainable and inclusive growth. In all these activities, the private sector must play a role. We cannot erode the capacity of the private sector to keep on generating solutions. And our entrepreneurship models are required. They also involve the requisite of having states that guarantee legal stability, legal security, and promote in an effective way the possibility of having new corporations, seeing them grow, generate employment, and transform individual technologies. I think this event is a great opportunity to make all these reflections. And Mr. Secretary Ban Ki-moon and President Sung, if we work today on identifying debt swap mechanisms for the impoverished countries so that they mobilize climate action and they can get their debt write-off based on effective traceability of climate action projects, we will advance. And also, if we allow for middle-income countries to have climate action investments that will not be counted under the fiscal deficit for quite some time, before 2030, we will also release an amount of resources that is required today. But most importantly, we need to look at all these green investments, not as a complementary way of living. There is no possibility of having a more egalitarian or a more sustainable growth society if we don't guarantee that climate action based on carbon neutral and nature positive solutions are built. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And as I have expressed it many times, my commitment to work on all these efforts with the Yonsei University and with the leadership of former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, is always there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Marquez. So after this first segment filled with messages of hope, optimism, and enthusiasm, we will now be taking a 10-minute break and return shortly after 11:05. Thank you very much.